that I'm working at, depending on what the tradition of that theater is and what the expectations are and what the audience is. I started by directing, and this was a number of years ago, but at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, which was a much more traditional approach to the work, and things, they were under new artistic directorship at the time, so things were beginning to change, but it was coming out of a culture where, you set those plays during Shakespeare's lifetime. So like the window was small in terms of where you could go. And then I've also done a couple of shows at Santa Cruz Shakespeare, which is a company that's committed to gender parity, where 50% of the cast are men and 50% are women, and so the decision making comes from how am I going to use those women in a non-traditional way, and what kind of world supports that decision. So it's been cool.
Yeah, and so specific. But what about scholarship and scholarly texts and secondary sources and things like, reading about Elizabethan history and Shakespeare's life, or scholarly works on the specific play in question? Are you reading those as well? And Laura, you can start with that.
I'm not doing that too much. I think I'm counting on. It's for me. It's the text, and then once we decide on a world, if I need to dive into Vienna history or something for the setting for Measure, then I'll do that kind of research. But it's more I think that research for me is more in terms of the work with coming up with what things are going to look like and where it's going to take place.
How about you, Vivian?
For me, the sort of dramaturgy part of it is ongoing, and if we're lucky enough to have a dramaturg on hand to sort of build the world of resources for the design team and the cast, that is always fantastic. But for me, in terms of scholarship, it is always just going back to the text before you even get to World of Play, to see what is evoked in all the clues that Shakespeare gives you. So once that is really done, certainly I love to read Asimov's previews to Shakespeare to each of the plays are fantastic and give you a sort of historical context, and certainly the source materials. I'm not going to go read the source material for Two Noble Kinsmen beyond knowing that it exists and what the stories were, and knowing that, I don't feel necessarily that mining those texts is as helpful as thinking about what the play is for us today.
Right, and you said, though, at first you go straight to what other people have done. Can you give me an example of a movie or recording of a play that you've watched and it set you on a certain course, either gave you an idea, inspired something, or you thought, no.
I was doing a production of Much Ado About Nothing, and I inevitably, watched the Kenneth Branagh, Emma Thompson, so beautifully set in the rolling hills of the Italian countryside, and I loved the film, but for me what was great about watching it was that it hit all this sort of sense of romance to me, but didn't get to the underlying textual machismo. There's always especially in male behavior in many a Shakespeare play, sort of the justification for why are they behaving this way? Oh my God. And in that machismo led me towards, we wound up in Cuba of the 1930s, but the film really, really helped me understand, again, the romance, the breeziness, the darkness of it, and for me, what was missing, and really start me investigating other options than the Italianate option that he had actually written it for.
Interesting. And Laura, you also did a Much Ado in Santa Cruz, right?
Yeah, and again, that's linking back to the casting, sort of being one of the driving ideas with coming up with the world for the play. I'd spoken with the artistic director, Mike Ryan, and he had some ideas about where we might use some of the women non-traditionally. And so we decided, and we had a great actress to play Leonato, but playing it as Leonata, so as Hero's mother. And then also we had a woman playing Antonia, So it turned into a matriarchal family. So I needed to come up with a way to have a world that made sense with that truth. And so we settled on, it was right after World War II with the troops coming home. The women were at home running the vineyard. Dogberry was not, he had really bad vision, like Coke bottle glasses, so that he wasn't able to go off and fight, and the watch were, the Boy Scouts that were too young to fight. So we had to kind of come up with a world that made sense for that kind of casting, and I thought it worked really, really well. And there's an interesting thing that happens when you put a woman into a role that is traditionally played by a man, and you hear the play in a different way. And it was, I don't know, I thought it was really cool, and now I want to play Leonardo.
Oh my God, no, I'm fascinated by that, Laura, because, well, specifically given what I was just talking about, that I'm so curious what that was like.
Yeah.
In terms of that, again, that sort of, what I sort of found and mined within that sort of male toxicity, when
Right.
you put women in the parental roles there, what did that, I'm so curious what that did.
Well, I found it so interesting to have a mother say those things to a daughter, when Hero at the wedding. It super painful to hear. Like, it's always painful to hear the father say that to a daughter anyway, but having it coming out of the mouth of a mother was an incredible experience. But then to have the mother, once she realizes what has actually happened, to defend her daughter, and that great little scene with Antonio and Leonardo kind of taking on Claudio, and to have these women kind of roaring up to the defense of this girl, I found really, really powerful. And I think